Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Hirobe Talks podcast. Today, I'm joined by Marc Giannettino, who is the VP of Service Delivery at Wonder. Marc, for those that don't know yourselves, do you mind just giving a brief background of kind of your professional and experience?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here. Great to be meeting with you. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. I am a 20-year veteran of marketing and creative services, combination of both agency and client-side roles across several different industries: media, entertainment, publishing, telecom, financial services, healthcare. Sort of zigzagged career throughout a number of multifunctional disciplines. So performance marketing, brand management, creative direction, creative ops, and MarTech. Have had a really kind of diverse kind of journey throughout my career, which has landed me in my current role at Wonder, heading up our service delivery team. For those of your listeners who don't know, Wonder, we are a CX strategy and delivery consultancy that really helps to specialize in organizations wanting to optimize the overall end-to-end kind of customer experience, but also with the underlying content supply chain solutions that are responsible for kind of underpinning those content experiences that our clients are really creating and distributing to create those interactions and create those experiences for their customers. So sort of combination of strategy and consulting, as well as technical implementation, enablement, automation, integration services as well, across a pretty wide spectrum of capabilities and functions.
Awesome. No, I really appreciate that. And I love your background as well. You're clearly a very talented guy, which is always nice.
Thank you. It's been fun. Yeah. Always learning something.
That's it. Every day is a learning day, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And I think one of the points I think you touched on really, we obviously deal with it a lot as well, is kind of the content supply chain. So I suppose my opening question, Marc, would be, when we talk about content supply chain, what exactly do we mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so. That term, to me, that term is currently the center square on the buzzword bingo card, right? Because I think it's a term that's gotten a lot of attention in the last couple of years. Especially among marketing operations, marketing technology, and brand management folks, right? And I think at its core, it is really the combination of systems, problems, processes, people who are responsible for content velocity, content strategy, content plan. And so the thing that I want to make sure we don't mistake here is that the mind kind of immediately goes to the underlying technology, right? And the tools that are used likely to produce and distribute content. And the technology is critical, no question about it. But when we talk about the content supply chain, we are actually talking more holistically around the alignment of people, process, technology, and data that are responsible for that end-to-end content journey, from its initial planning through work management and creative production, through asset management, through distribution, through performance measurement, and sort of that closed loop cycle. It really is that bringing together of people, process, technology, and data.
I love that. And I think even for me, that's really, really helpful, Marc. I think when I've heard content supply chain before, I've kind of thought Adobe Workfront or, kind of tools specific, and I think my view has probably been a little bit too small. I think, as you mentioned, it's the whole ecosystem, right?
No, yeah. And I think, so one of the things that brought me to Wonder actually was really just kind of a strong philosophical alignment with the way this organization thinks. And that is that ultimately systems are in place to enable process, and processes in place to enable people. And what gets me excited is actually the people enablement. It's like, how can we improve ways of working? How can we improve the experience of work for employees? Because it has been proven time and time again that when you focus on improving the experience of work, the natural byproducts of that are productivity, efficiency, better collaboration, better transparency, and all of the business drivers and business outcomes that the C-suite ultimately wants to invest in. So to your point, the underlying technology is sort of the most obvious layer here. But what we really want to make sure when we work with clients that we're focusing on is Are we focusing on the right things? Are we, I made the mistake early in my career, and it was a very expensive mistake, of assuming that really good technology will fix a broken process. And luckily, that was a mistake I only needed to make once. Because I think what that taught me early in my career ultimately is that the technology is an enabler. But if you aren't first aligned on what those core processes are, if you haven't created a sense of shared expectation across the cross-functional stakeholders and interdependent groups who are handing things off. Every organization has a content supply chain, whether they know it or not, whether they acknowledge it or not. It's just, is it there by design or is it there by default? And so, we look at the technology and we focus very deeply on the technology, but it is a layer that sort of comes after kind of understanding, like, do we have organizational alignment? Are we clear on expectations, what we're trying to solve for? What are the blind spots, the blockers, the bottlenecks that we're really trying to alleviate? And are those process problems? Are they technological limitation problems? Or are they people alignment problems? Or is it a combination? Oftentimes it's a combination of the majority of those. And so we really try to really kind of take that holistic approach.
I love that. And I think it's essentially made something that's quite complex ultimately appear really simple. And I suppose that's what you and the team do, right?
We try. Nice. I mean, I think I wouldn't. It's not simple. I mean, I think ultimately, because I think when you get into this, you are, like anything, you're going to start by working with a series of assumptions. You're going to aim to validate or modify those assumptions through research, right? And so whether that's stakeholder interviews, whether that's assessment frameworks and tools and things like that. But I mean, ultimately, the starting point is, if you think about kind of the cycle here, like you start with this notion of, what data do we have access to? Are there insights that can be derived from that data? Are there hypotheses that we can form from those insights? How does that then lead us to a strategy, which then leads to kind of a tactical plan, which then ultimately delivers more data to then continue to operate and iterate? And so I think, what we really try to aim for is, not trying to boil the ocean, right? Because I think to your point earlier, like it seems complex, and it can be, right? Because there's a lot of different interconnected concepts here and themes. But don't try to boil the ocean. Try to think about this not as a transformation, which sort of has kind of this binary expectation of before and after. It's like, start and finish, but rather more of a journey of modernization, because your business processes will change as your business requirements change. The enabling technology is accelerating at a rate faster than anyone can really comprehend. And so it's about just kind of being measured in your approach and more iterative innovation as you go, and kind of thinking about, how do we just build this into our DNA as a culture, as an organization, so that we're constantly working to get better every day.
I love that. And I suppose from thinking about, the clients that you kind of work with and the clients maybe that I'd work with as well, mm-hmm. How can an organization know where they fall in terms of the content supply chain maturity scale?
Maturity, yeah, that's a good question. So we actually have designed a maturity framework for this, right? And we found that was sort of a need that we needed as we were having these conversations. We said, what, we don't have kind of a common vocabulary that we can align on. And so we actually began by developing a maturity scale for your content supply chain. And so it's not surprising. I mean, it ranges kind of on the far left, it's kind of an ad hoc, very sort of reactive and fragmented and sort of siloed ways of working in systems and processes, to all the way on the far end, sort of industry leading, where your content operations are actually a competitive advantage and a competitive differentiator. And those are typically characterized by organizations that are leveraging, carefully designed and integrated processes, integrated systems. They're leveraging AI where it makes sense to leverage AI. They've got advanced analytics to govern decision making, and there's ultimately seamless collaboration and interaction across the cross-functional groups that are there. And so this framework, that we've established, how do you measure it? So we've developed an assessment, and it captures a couple different versions of this for different use cases. But the very first step is there's a self-assessment that we've developed that anybody can go onto our website and access, and it's actually free. And they can go there. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes, to complete this self-assessment. But I think it's worth the time, because what you're going to get from that in the battery of questions that you're being asked to kind of grade your own organization on is you're going to get a readout that not only gives you kind of an overarching maturity score and a rating on kind of where you fit today, but it's going to break down that scoring by the alignment of people and process and technology and data across those kind of key pillars that we talked about: strategic planning, work management, creative production, asset management, distribution. So when you look at this, right, you go through this 10 to 15 minute survey, you get an immediate report that reads this out to you, that provides those kind of insights as well as some recommendations. Now, does it automatically answer the burning questions of, why is this wrong, or why do we have these problems? No. But what it does is it drops the breadcrumbs that allows you to kind of determine, where are our problem spots here? Like where are the areas where we are, maybe more mature than others, and where do we really want to focus first? So if anyone's actually interested in doing that, they can certainly go out to our website. It's just wonder.com/survey. And you can go straight to the assessment. I will spell out Wonder because it is not common spelling. It's WNDYR.com/survey. And the assessment is just there and can be taken by anybody who's interested.
Awesome. Yeah, and we can post a link to that on this video as well, because I think it'd be so useful for, people in our space as well, kind of the clients that we work with as well. I'd highly recommend checking it out.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And I suppose, again, that kind of brings me, you've kind of identified, the organizations, they found out where they fall in the kind of maturity scale. So what advice would you give to companies when it comes to what you alluded to before, that alignment of people, process, and data?
Good. So three things. I think the first I sort of addressed earlier, essentially, which is, don't assume that the technology alone is the silver bullet to the process problem, right? Any more than technology is a cure for misaligned stakeholders either, right? So I think, what we have learned through doing this is that, and so the assessment that I mentioned, we have an alternate version of it that's a more facilitated, kind of structured delivery of this thing, where we will actually construct a customized version for a client organization so that we can actually survey a broad cross-section of the people who contribute to their content supply chain, from various functions, various roles, various role levels within an organization. And almost 100% of the time, what you will find is that perceptions vary greatly. As people are kind of self-assessing, right? They vary greatly across different functional groups, as well as across different roles in the organization. The way a C-suite or VP might respond to a certain part of that survey is going to be sometimes very different than the way, a team lead or an individual contributor was. And it's not surprising, because their perception is informed by the lens through which they're looking. And so when we start to see those kinds of situations, unfold, first of all, it's non-judgmental, because we fully expect it, right? And what we want to do is actually provoke those initial conversations to say, let's make sure that before we start planning a roadmap, before we start planning, process design changes, or, swapping out technology, or automating processes, or integrating systems, like, let's make sure that we've got clarity among the stakeholder population on what are our primary objectives, what are we trying to achieve, what is needed from each of us in order to contribute to that, to be successful, and how can we make sure we're moving in the right direction. So I think, which leads me to kind of second piece of advice, right? People, process, technology. Of the three, guess which is the hardest to change? It's people, right? People are always going to be the hardest to change, because of the fact that we are ingrained in what's familiar to us. Like we have a natural tendency to kind of normalize what's familiar, even if it isn't healthy, even if it isn't right? So when you start to kind of plan out and build these journeys and these roadmaps, for the modernization of your supply chain, don't underestimate the impact of that change on the people who will have to adopt it and who will have to kind of work through it. And so focused change management needs to be a core part of that experience, a core part of that. You don't turn it on and expect people are going to know what to do. Our goal is to make it so that the experience is so intuitive that it's impossible for people to do the wrong thing, right? But I think ultimately that change experience is is pretty difficult for folks to manage. And then I think, as you've aligned on those expectations, I think then you can really start to chip away at what is the crawl, walk, run. If you are at a maturity stage 2 right now, let's not assume that in 6 to 9 months you're going to be at a 5. Like, let's build iterative progress into the plan, set measurable goals, make sure that we can actually read out and validate that we've achieved what we've set out to achieve, and really aim to build this into the DNA and the culture of the organization, that this becomes kind of a continuous part of just how we work, and how we plan and how we collaborate.
I love that. And I think obviously you got my cogs turning there a bit as well, Mark. I think, when I thought about it and thought, okay, yeah, well, the hard thing would be changing the process, right? Because once you change that, people buy into it, and it's kind of, that's the hard thing, is changing the actual process. But
yeah,
I'd never really thought about it the way you've kind of described it, where it's actually, it's the people that kind of have to buy into that, and you've got to convince that entire kind of change in thinking. And it has just kind of, spun the way that I think about it on its head, which is always nice. And I think really interesting.
I'll give you a very real world example. So it never ceases to amaze me how often leaders within organizations will hear and receive recommendations, and those that know their organizations well are usually the first to say, okay, that's great, I can absolutely see that as a future state. We are probably 5 steps from that. So, like, we know what our people are willing to absorb and adopt. We know what they're going to reject. We know, and it isn't, a compliance issue so much as it is, people want to know what is expected of them in terms, like, they want stability in terms of knowing what's expected in terms of how do I get my job done. And so a great example is a shared service creative team that supports multiple brands within a larger sort of parent organization, right? Everything kind of funnels into this shared service team. If the way that team has to operate is very ad hoc and different depending on who's initiating the request, their day-to-day work is going to feel very chaotic, right? And it's not to say that things need to be robotic and not leave any room for ambiguity or creativity. I think our goal is to kind of find the right balance of accountability with agility in the way we design those processes, so people understand kind of the major frameworks, and they say, okay, these are the things that we're all agreeing to together to ensure that we've got consistency and we've got sort of a stability of process for those handoffs and for the visibility that we need, while still allowing room to color outside the lines where you need to. Because the reality is that no project actually survives the best planning in the world. There's always going to be things that come up. So we had a customer come to us once and say, they were struggling because they were adopting they were adopting Workfront, actually, a work management solution, and they had implemented it. They had gone through initial training. They were dealing with some pushback and some struggle. And when they ultimately came to us, the major champion within the organization, like, she was sort of at her wit's end, and what she said was, I went on vacation for a week, and when I came back, everyone had sort of jumped ship, and they were reverting back to routing things via email and collaborating in other channels. And it's like, we said, okay, well, what that's indicative of is the initial implementation didn't necessarily deliver the value to those users for them to understand how this benefits them. Because to your point, Tom, like, the process design is hard because it isn't always going to be easier at every step. Sometimes there are trade-offs. Sometimes you're like, we're going to slow down over here in order to speed up later. Sometimes it's, we're going to run things in parallel that used to be sequential, or we're going to intersect things. And so, there is just friction that comes with that change that people need to understand. They need to be part of that solutioning, and you need to get that input, not just from kind of the higher levels of the organization that can articulate how they want it to be, but from the boots on the ground who can tell you how it really is. Like, this is what really goes on in the trenches, and this is how we're really getting through the day-to-day. And that's really where that kind of experience strategy and experience design comes into play here as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And like I say, really thinking point for me in terms of, just actually changing the way that I'm kind of viewing that now. So big thank you for that one, Mark. Appreciate it. And I suppose then bringing that back to, I suppose, Wonder. I mean, how can Wonder help support companies across content supply chain and the Adobe ecosystem?
Yeah, great question. So I think, we've talked about a lot of this in terms of upfront assessment. How can we help an organization establish kind of current state baseline, set strategy, set goals and objectives, kind of map out a roadmap for this. I think, that is really kind of the beginning of this. But then I think planning through that strategy and understanding how then to execute on that roadmap. We're not the type of partner that's just going to work with you to design the playbook, hand it over, and wish you luck, right? So we are end to end in terms of we will help guide through the process mapping, the process redesign and validation. We will help with technology selection and technology implementation, right? So we've got a very strong workfront team, an AEM team that's involved as well, and we will help to design and implement those solutions and validate, and we'll also lead through the change management aspect of that, right? So we will ensure that your users who need to adopt are properly enabled, they are properly trained, they're supported through especially those critical first weeks and months post any sort of significant change where stabilizing adoption is critical, because there needs to be fairly high touch and high response to that as they start to pressure test all of these things that performed swimmingly during UAT and now are facing kind of real world pressures of, okay, now there's 50 of these coming in at once, and does it hold up, and how do we adjust to that? So we are very much an end-to-end solution provider for that. But if you think about it too, if you zoom out from that content supply chain and the enabling technologies like Workfront, Creative Cloud, AEM, et cetera, that content supply chain is a subset of that underlying customer experience strategy and that customer experience journey. And so organizations who are really looking to embrace customer centricity, embrace a CX focused approach, we can also help kind of organizationally establish those systems and processes and ways of working and actually help them optimize those journeys for their customers as well. So the supply chain is ultimately it's the frameworks and it's the plumbing and it's the how we get it done. We can also assist with aligning on, are we focusing on the right things? Is your content, is your experience resonating? Does it meet your users' needs? Is it aligning with their goals and objectives of what they're looking for from you as well?
Perfect. So that more holistic strategy as well, the strategy piece as well. Yeah, yep. Awesome. Yeah. No, great to hear. I've heard good things from Wonder as well, and what you guys are doing. So no problem at all. Yeah, big advocate of the work. Yeah. I think one thing, again, I think I've mentioned this probably on every podcast I've kind of done, especially this year, that we can't ignore is the rise of AI. And I'm keen to sort of hear your take on this, Mark. What does AI mean for content, over the coming years?
Yeah, so I will correct my earlier answer. AI is probably the center square on the bingo card, right? Because you can't ignore it. Having a point of view on this and having a plan for how you're going to enable and to what extent you're going to has become sort of table stakes, right? For organizations that need to be able to deliver at scale. And so from my standpoint, when you ask, so what does it mean over the coming years? I think we're already seeing significant advances in generative AI in terms of content production, content creation. Now there are still there's still varying schools of thought on organizations' appetite for, are we ready to lean in for full production ready artwork, or are we just using it for concepting? And I think my point of view on it is that's going to be situational, organization to organization. I personally think that the solutions that exist today are fantastic at helping to drive the sort of notion of democratization of content. Now that doesn't mean that you're eliminating brand oversight or creative direction. And again, as a former creative director, like, I can appreciate the need for that. But you look at organizations where they have a significant volume of derivative works, like localized, hey, we've got sort of this master campaign art or series of concepts, but we need just a massive volume of derivative outputs for various localized. how many hands really need to touch that, right? The AI can enable the initial marketer who is currently making those requests of creative teams who are pushing those down to their studio teams to execute and churn and burn. The tools are there today to enable the marketers to self-serve and to do so with a pretty good level of compliance around defined brand standards, around sort of templatized outputs, but to be able to iterate and manipulate within a definable set of tools. I think Adobe's Gen Studio for performance marketing product is a great example of that, right? In terms of the way they've solved for that with channels like email and social and banner and a lot of those performance marketing, because those are very, very much high volume derivative types of channels. What I also see that's, I think, exciting is the role AI is going to play, not just sort of in the generative content creation or content production space, but how is AI going to actually help optimize process? And if you think about the way agentic AI can be applied towards analysis of process and proactive recommendations, and I've used this example before. Imagine, you've got a video project template that you use, and every organization, you templatize this work so that you can be somewhat predictable. But imagine that AI is telling you, hey, look, the last 6 times that you ran projects using this template for this client specifically, you were 3 to 4 weeks behind schedule and X% over budget, right? Like, imagine being able to leverage that kind of intelligence in real time to say, how do we need to make, to adjust our decisioning the next time out? Like, where can we identify the hot spots, or do we need to change our assumptions because there's just something about the way work is happening with this organization that is just inherently going to take longer, or is inherently going to cost more, or we need to kind of have an adjustment of expectations, right? So thinking about the way AI can enable process decision making and process enablement, not just kind of the actual production of the content itself, I think there's a lot of territory that's being explored. And like anything, going back to alignment, organizations kind of need to be clear about their own sort of governance around this. What are we looking to achieve with it? What are we willing to allow to be democratized to the end user? Where does human oversight and sort of brand need to remain intact? And find that right spot for now, but continue to push in a way and at a pace that makes sense for the organization. I don't subscribe to the notion of being bleeding edge for the sake of being bleeding edge. That's not right for everybody. And so I think it's really about kind of recognizing who you are and where you are and where you're trying to go.
Brilliant. No, I love that. And like you say, we can't ignore what AI is doing, and it is exciting to see how it's going to influence things like supply chain and operations and processes as well. And I think streamlining efficiencies is a big one, right?
For sure. Yeah.
One thing we've seen a rise of, especially when we recruit, I think for AEM roles, clients are often wanting people who've got experience with both CMS and DAM, or digital asset management. Yeah. So I'd love to kind of pick your brains on that, Mark, for kind of the audience that don't understand as well. What is digital asset management, and how would companies benefit from this?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a concept, again, that I think is oftentimes kind of misinterpreted or misunderstood. So you would be surprised how many very large organizations, when we ask them, what are you using for digital asset management today, we'll hear things like, oh, we're using SharePoint, or we're using Box or Dropbox. And so I think, just first of all, distinguishing between document or file management and file sharing solutions and digital asset management, right? I think one of the main differentiators ultimately is that a true digital asset management solution enables the efficient organization and discoverability of your content through robust metadata. And so when you think about, all of the waste that goes on in organizations in terms of time spent trying to find the right asset, or trying to find the most recent version of something, or trying to find the one that's been approved, and how much time actually gets spent recreating things that have already been created for some other purpose, right? Those are the kinds of challenges that a real digital asset management solution will help. Because if you've designed your organizational strategy, and if you've designed your metadata and taxonomy structure you're not gonna find yourself burying these really valuable assets in multiple layers of foldering hierarchy never to be seen again, right? You're going to be able to create very intuitive and faceted search and sort and filtering criteria for people to be able to quickly get to what they're looking for. AI advancements here as well in terms of, prompting the search rather than kind of specific keyword searching, prompting based on intent and related items and things like that. I mean, there's so much enhancement that's happening there that, what I get excited about with the digital asset management solution is the fact that when you allow it to integrate with a work management solution like Workfront, one of the biggest hurdles I think people have or companies have to adopting a DAM is the metadata management. It's the administrative work that the designers don't have time to do unless you actually have a dedicated sort of DAM librarian who's kind of managing that, which a lot of organizations don't, right? It gets overlooked, and then it's you're not getting the value out of it. But when you think about the fact that a vast majority of the contextual metadata that you would want attached to those assets is already being generated through the fact that the work that's being managed in Workfront to produce this asset is already enriched with an understanding of, hey, what campaign is this associated with? What quarter, what target audience is it associated with? What regions or localities is it involved in? What are the kind of the themes or key products that are involved? I mean, so much of that already exists. And when you start to think about the integration between a tool like Workfront and a tool like AEM Assets, now all of a sudden, as these assets get produced, as they get routed through for review and approval, and ultimately once they're approved and pushed to the DAM, all of that existing metadata travels with them. It's there, right? And now you actually have a solution where people can find relevant material. They can see what's approved. You can put appropriate security in place to make sure that things that aren't approved are not making their way out the door. You don't have kind of rogue assets kind of flying around. I mean, there's a ton of other benefits like version control and version management as well. With CMS just being, just the notion of being able to create assets like content fragments that are sort of agnostic of style. Imagine being able to produce and store a piece of content in the DAM and render it an infinite number of ways because it is agnostic to the stylization of how it's ultimately going to be deployed. And so this is really, as you start to think about kind of maturing the solution within an organization and how do we drive content production at scale, content distribution at scale, and personalization at scale, all of that can be enabled by a really clear strategy and implementation for DAM solution.
Brilliant. I know that's, I think, really interesting to hear as well. And, especially given the rise of it and kind of the growing need that we're seeing for DAM as well. Really interesting to hear your take on that, Mark.
Yeah.
Now, again, appreciate you're busy, so I will let you shoot off now. I'll wrap the podcast up. But before going, I always like to ask, what are your plans for kind of the rest of 2025, and what are you and the Wonder team kind of planning on? Anything big, anything kind of exciting on the horizon?
Yeah, I think there's so much change. It's constant, right? And so we are continuing to kind of lean into this more holistic content supply chain solutioning approach, right? I think the more conversations we have with customers that sort of begin with a holistic assessment, the more impactful our expertise is able to be on helping them really kind of put into context where their roadmap is going to go, and so we're leaning into that. We're absolutely leaning into CX strategy and CX delivery enablement as well, beyond just kind of the content supply chain, but that more overarching strategy as well. And I think it's a weird time in the world right now, right? So I think we're all just trying to read the tea leaves about how things go. But I think that what's exciting about Wonder and what's exciting about We Do is that we've got specializations of very, very specific disciplines, but with a generalist kind of overarching approach. So there's a lot of ways we can kind of plug in and be useful and helpful. So just really excited. I'd love to hear from any of your listeners. When you put the URL up, you can feel free to put my email address up as well, because we're all real people here. It's like, I would love to hear from anybody who has questions or wants to talk more about that. Be happy to spend some time.
For sure, mate. I will do that 100%, Mark. And, you know, as always, it's been a pleasure chatting to you today on the podcast and in general as well. I think you're an awesome guy. And I love what you and the Wonder team are doing. So wish you all the best for 2025 as well. And again, thank you so much for joining me today and for your time.
Tom, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Mark. Take care.
You too.